My daughter's got one of those about like video cameras.
Well, good evening. Thank you for coming back. It's always nice to have you here, especially on a, I'd say, chilly night, but that'd be exaggerating. You know, cold night. It's no longer chilly. We are going to be in Daniel chapter 11, actually going through the Syrian Wars. We began them last week. It's a very difficult section of Scripture to go through, not because it's complicated, but because you've got so many kings of the south and kings of the north, and Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second. So if you open up to your books, to page 152, the year 303, page 152, we've got the list of kings there. We read through it last week after we went through Alexander's conquering of the world. And again, this is important stuff because it's setting up the New Testament, setting up kind of the Jewish history of what Jesus is going to be facing. And what you got with Alexander was he was trained in Greek culture and Greek, the language and the way of life. Aristotle was his teacher. Alexander then conquers the world, brings that Western or Greek culture to the whole world, and that begins to infiltrate the Jewish culture. It's called Hellenism, named after the Greek goddess Helen. Or the great famous Greek woman. And so that came into the cities, and actually where Jewish culture is based like on the temple and glorifying God and is more of a rural or community, the Greek culture is based in the city. And Alexander always would start a city, name many of them Alexandria, and it's all focused on the city. So you can see we're going to have a conflict between Judaism, or the Jewish way of life, the law, combined with what the Hellenistic culture is going to begin, and it's going to lead to some major conflicts. The problem is the Jews are going to be split. Some are going to say, hey, we like the new culture. Others are going to say, hey, we're losing our traditional way of life. We're losing our culture. We're losing God. We're losing our temple service. And you're going to see a variety of things happen here this evening. Another thing in Daniel chapter 11, if you take a look at this very quickly, Daniel chapter 11, verse 2, and again, we've read this several times. We've read it many weeks ago. But the angel speaking to Daniel says, now then I tell you the truth, 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and that's coming after Cyrus. It's talking about going down to Xerxes and Artaxerxes, or all the way down until Xerxes stirs up everyone against the Greeks in verse 2. Then a mighty king will appear, that's Alexander the Great, verse 3. But then in verse 5, we begin talking about the king of the south and the king of the north. And we'll pick that up here in just a moment and look at some history. And that runs from verse 5, runs all the way like around 300 BC with the death of Alexander the Great and his empire being divided up amongst his 4 or 5 generals. And it marches all the way through those verses, going through the king of the south, the king of the north, the king of the south, the king of the north, Ptolemy and Seleucus and Ptolemy and Antiochus, all the way up until hopefully we'll get to verse 35 or so this evening. And right there is the time of the Maccabean revolt. You've got the death of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus the Fourth. But then, just so you see this, another reason this is important is now verse 36. It says, the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He'll be successful until the time of wrath is completed. And it continues to talk about events up until the beginning of chapter 12, or it'd be verse 45. Now, the thing about that is those verses are not talking about Alexander. They're not talking about Ptolemy or Antiochus Epiphanes. Those verses now are talking about something that hasn't happened yet. They're now into eschatology. You're now into what I would believe is the Antichrist that's coming. And so what happens here, what's important about this is, one, we've got history to march right through this and explain this. It's not, in a sense, it was prophecy, it was eschatology at one time, but we've now got history. So we can stand there and look like a genius, although I won't. I got 6 wars to go through tonight. I'm going to look like I'm confused. But I go through and say, all these things happen and show you the great details. But as soon as we hit verse 36, you lose the history, and you're now into prophecy. And so now you're kind of, I don't want to say speculating, but you're now kind of waiting for it to be fulfilled and trying to figure out what it is saying. But I guess my point is, as you use hermeneutics, or the principles of interpretation, you've got 35 verses that you know how to interpret them because it's already happened. And then you slip into verse 36, like, well, now how do we do this? It's not going to be any different. You just keep going the same way. It's just this is now yet in the future. And so it kind of, these verses that we're going to study tonight are historical. They lay a foundation for the New Testament. They reveal a whole lot about the Jewish culture and what was going on in the world, so they're very important. But they're also helpful in the practice of hermeneutics. On what are you going to do with these next verses and how are you going to interpret the rest of the chapter, and lays down some prophecy. So no matter how you view your eschatology, amillennial, postmillennial, probably not very many postmillennial people left after World War I and World War II, but if you're here, good luck. Premillennial, how you view all of that is, these are your verses, but you've got to have these other verses to kind of help you kind of get it right. We're going tonight. It's right around 274, the first Syrian War, second Syrian War, all the way down through here. The years are in your book right there. This will be Antiochus Epiphanes, right before the Maccabean revolt. We're going to end up there tonight, so that's kind of where we're headed. And we're really not studying Daniel. We're just going through history, just that Daniel ends up prophesying about these things. So here's our map very quickly. We're going to write this several times. Here's Egypt. Here's Jerusalem, Galilee, Dead Sea. Over here is going to be Greece. We're going to come back over here to Greece one more time up by Thermopylae up here. The Seleucid Empire extended over to Babylon. Now again, you've got a map. If you flip back to page 151, and if you really want to go back to page 148, there you've got Alexander's march across, going east, conquering everywhere he went. Of course, you get better maps on the internet if you want to see something better. He dies, and the empire is divided up, and it goes into these basic positions as you see in page 151. Lysimachus up in Macedonia, Antipater and Cassander in Greece, Antigonus, who's going to be taken out by Seleucus, and Seleucus is going to control from Babylon into Syria, and then Ptolemy is in Egypt. So down here in Egypt is going to be Ptolemy. And there's going to be a whole line of Ptolemies. Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, a whole line of them until you hit the Cleopatras, and there'll be 10 Cleopatras. And then Seleucid is going to take from Babylon over to here. And this right here, it's, we were talking to someone the other day about this, is no matter where you are in history, this place, Israel, was a hotbed. Abraham leaves Ur of the Chaldeans and comes down into here. When he gets here, there's 7 nations living there. And this distance from right here, to right about here, it's like 140 miles. From here to here is, 60, it's in your book, earlier in the book, there's 60, depending on how close you are to the north or the south. Let's just say 70 miles to be safe right in there. You can get 4 of these in the state of Iowa, 4 of this. When Abraham came here, there's 7 nations living there. The Hittites, the Canaanites, and we added the Moabites over here, the Ammonites over here, the Edomites were added here, and then Israel God says, I give you this land. And it's like, why is it so important? Even today it's in the news, obviously. But it's like, what do they have? Well, everybody's after the oil. No, there's no oil there. I mean, that's one place. Even the rabbis have complained to God, said, God, if this is the promised land, why here? If we just would have gone south or north, so we would have had oil, but here we don't have any oil.
They found some yesterday.
They've been looking for it. They think there's some there. And if you read Joel Rosenberg's books, you read those, there's oil coming, he thinks. So, but even today, it's what are they fighting for? Here's one of the reasons. This is the bridge. Because this is a desert over in this area, and it's a bridge to the south, a bridge to the north, and whoever controls this has access to Egypt, or if Egypt gets control of this, it's a buffer zone from the north taking their country. The great battles were fought right here, Megiddo. There's a plain right here, the plain of Megiddo. Armageddon is said to be there, coming from the word Hay-Margiddo, which is a city there, Megiddo, the hill of Megiddo, Armageddon. So the great battles have been fought there, and there may be some yet to be fought in the future. So, Abraham's day was a busy place, all the way through history. Now, we're going to see tonight, this area right here is still very important in our story tonight, and even in today, and it's not going to change.